Hi everybody, this is Paul B, and the video you're about to watch contains audio that is one of the smoking guns, in my case, against gross Minnesota apathy, negligence, and incompetence. What you're about to hear, to me, is the equivalent of the Zapruder film. And the Zapruder film was the 8mm home movie of the Kennedy assassination that we've all seen and have all been horrified by. In that film, in the frame where Kennedy's head explodes, you are witnessing the very instant when the United States of America, which was not even 200 years old yet, lost its innocence and began its downward spiral to the mess that it's in today. And what you're about to hear in this video is the same thing in my life. You're about to hear the very instant when my life transformed from a life of hope and potential to a life that was no longer worth living. And indeed, the next call I made after the call to the police that you're about to hear was to the suicide hotline. And that is how my life has gone ever since. The audio you're about to hear was recorded on November 30, 2013. That was about 2 years ago. I'm recording this commentary in October of 2015. And I cannot even listen to this audio all the way through without getting nauseous. It is the equivalent to me of a rape victim having to watch a video of their own molestation. Because again, you're going to hear a New Brighton, Minnesota police officer fail to do his job so completely, so totally, that it marks the very instant when my life began its decline toward where I am today, which is homeless, all my possessions gone, my job gone, my career gone, all hope of having a family or a home of my own gone, my life gone. And the reason for it, more than any other single incident that happened throughout this about 4-year ordeal I've dealt with, is what you're going to hear right now. This police officer's horrible performance. Now the thing is, I understand that you as an outside observer, as a voyeur, if you will, who are accustomed to hearing 9/11 calls on YouTube and on the news, this is just another police call to you. This doesn't have the same significance to you that it does to me. So I hope you will bear with me if I just give a brief introduction to help you understand why what you're about to hear is documentation of a serious breach of the public trust. Now, to begin with, we have to put this in the proper timeline. At the time I made this call in November of 2013, I had lived in my New Brighton apartment for almost 7 years. 7 years is almost 2 presidential terms. It is as long as it takes many people to get a PhD out of high school. 7 years is a long time. And by that time, I knew every nook and cranny of my apartment. I knew every idiosyncrasy of my apartment building and the local neighborhood and the local region. This place was my home. It was my familiar, comfortable castle. It was my respite from a crazy world. You know, I used to have to travel for business all the time and stay in, 5-star hotels, and a lot of you do too. When you stay in those places, even if someone else is paying for it, you're living like a king, and you're treated like a king, even though you're not a king. And as you lay on your heavenly bed at night, guess what? You still dream about going home. When you strip everything else away from Escape from Meannesota, the website, the videos, the audio, when you strip all of that away, what this is about is protecting the sanctity of the home. That is what Minnesota refuses to do, as you're about to see. So in that 7 years that I lived in that apartment at that time, the first 4 years were, frankly, just fine. It was a very nice place to live, in fact. It was close to work. It was a good place. I had to deal with the adult child's door slams. The people with the motorcycles moved in next door in 2009. Those were not huge issues. You could work around them. However, around the end of 2011 or the beginning of 2012, a succession of neighbors started moving in upstairs and later into other places who were increasingly loud and violent. And it happened so gradually. It didn't just transform overnight. That each one got worse. And it's like the boiling frog effect. If you throw a frog into a pan of water and start to heat it up, the frog doesn't realize that the water is getting hot until it becomes so hot that it's dangerous. In fact, it's going to boil him alive. That's the situation I was in. When the noise first started in roughly the beginning of 2012, it was very intermittent. It was very loud. It was noticeably loud, but it wasn't there all the time. In the middle of 2012, the foot-stomping bitch moved in, and she was the first truly obnoxious neighbor. Her foot-stomping was so loud and violent, and it was so frequent, although compared to the future neighbors, it wasn't as frequent, but at the time, it was very frequent. But she would stomp her feet and then pass out, or she would stomp her feet and then go out to get drunk so she could come back and stomp her feet and pass out later. But it was my first real introduction to having my life seriously interrupted, because it happened fairly frequently, and it would happen during overnight hours while I was trying to sleep because I worked for a living. The foot-stomping bitch was there for a year, and the landlord did nothing about it. In the middle of 2013, when she moved out, Muffy and the leech moved in upstairs. They were 10 times worse than the foot-stomping bitch. And little did I know it at the time, but when they left a year later, the jackass who moved in next would be 10 times worse than they were. But this era focuses on Muffy and the leech. Muffy was so loud, and because there were two of them, and the leech didn't seem to work, that's why I call him the leech, he seemed to be leeching off this girl, there was always somebody home to make noise, always. There was almost never a point when both of them were gone. And it became absolutely unbearable. After 1 month, I went to Muffy and I spoke to her about the noise. And I was very nice. I mean, just polite, humble, calm. I mean, I think I was very courteous to give her the benefit of the doubt, considering just how loud and violent she had been. It didn't really make sense to give her the benefit of the doubt, but I did. And all she did was stare at me with these glassy eyes, never said a word. Never said hello, never said nice to meet you, never said I'm sorry. Didn't say a word the whole time, and just closed her door very slowly while she stared at me with those glassy eyes that had no heart or soul behind them, or brain that I could tell. Then she didn't stop making the noise, so that made it clearer that I was dealing with that kind of a person. I then went to the landlord again through the summer of 2013, and he became very hostile toward me. Very hostile. He just blamed me as if somehow it was my fault that some other person in another place where I was not was making noise and injecting it into my home. He refused to enforce his own lease. He refused to do the job I was paying him to do. So after the landlord made it clear that he was going to do nothing, I went to the New Brighton City Council. And the reason I bypassed the police, there's a couple reasons. One is because in my experience and my observation and by reputation, they were useless. The other reason is because I'm not that neighbor. I'm not the guy who calls the police the minute you turn on your stereo. I believe that grown adults can work things out between themselves. In my experience in every other state I've lived in, that's exactly what happens. But that ain't the way it is in Minnesota. And that really threw my game off. I'm not used to working with people who are that incompetent and that narcissistic, who refuse to engage other people to work out conflicts between them. Just like when I tried to deal with Muffy and she couldn't even say anything, period. That's the same thing I get from all these so-called professionals in Minnesota. So I skipped the police. I went to the city council because the city council tells the police what to do. And this was also the advice of a noise advocacy organization. When I went to the city council, I brought along a presentation in 3 parts: problem, impact, solution. I brought along audio samples and an amplifier to play them. I brought along loudness charts and graphs. I brought along references to academic literature that clearly shows the link between noise and problems with human health. I brought along everything that I would have demanded if I were a city councilor before I would take action. The problem is they didn't want to hear it. They gave me 2 minutes to speak, and then they cut me off. Mayor Jacobson refused to allow me to play the audio, the evidence. So all I did was talk for 2 minutes about the problem. Didn't even get to the impact, and certainly didn't get to the solution. I did mention one impact. I went over my time and mentioned it anyway. It was the fact that I had not been allowed to properly grieve the deaths of both of my parents, and that remains to this very day. They died many years ago now. I have not had a peaceful day, a peaceful life since, where I could sit down and contemplate what it means that both of my parents are gone from this world. And that's just one of many, many impacts that this has had on me. But City Council didn't care. Mayor Jacobson instead sent me to the police. Now, I stepped outside the chambers, and through the glass we could still see the City Council. They could see us. I spoke to Police Chief Jacobson and also to a sergeant, Sergeant Nelson. Now, the thing is, at that time, while we're being watched, they were very nice, very understanding, very compassionate, kind. Everything you would expect. They were exactly what I'm used to experiencing everywhere else in the country, outside of Minnesota. The problem is I kind of know Minnesotans, and I knew their police department. Something was fishy. But I'll be honest with you, I actually had hope that these guys were going to do exactly what they said they were going to do. That is, tell the truth. They told me, if you call us, and I quote, "it will stop," unquote. So 4 days later, I called the police. I could have called them any of the days in between, but those were weekdays. I worked for a living. I didn't need another interruption from the police. I waited until Saturday. Muffy and the Leech started their noise barrage 1 or 2 in the morning, continued it on forever. I called the police at 10 o'clock. I have a recording of the whole day, from their noise in the early morning to me calling police dispatch to the officer's visit to the retaliation I got from Muffy and the Leech after the police officer spoke to them. But what you're going to hear in this audio of the police officer's visit, which lasted 8 minutes and 36 seconds, what you're going to hear is this man consistently and without exception either blaming the victim, defending the perpetrator, and or absolving himself of any responsibility to do his job and enforce the law as a law enforcement officer who represents his police department and the city of New Brighton. You are not going to hear one instance of where this man says, "My God, I can't believe what you're going through. This is terrible." You're not going to hear anything that even resembles that. Ever. And I'm going to play the entire audio. I'm going to interrupt it to throw in some comments, but I'm not leaving out 1 second of audio. You're going to hear the entire visit. You tell me if this guy gave a damn whether I lived or died, or if it sounds like he just couldn't wait to go out and get his sandwich. One thing is for certain, the contrast between his performance during his visit and what Police Chief Jacobson and Sergeant Nelson told me was going to happen represents a kind of schizophrenia that I have been trying so hard to communicate to people, and they don't seem to grasp it precisely because it is such a grand schizophrenia. These people say one thing over here, they do another thing there. These people can watch someone suffer in absolute misery and minimize it as if it's totally trivial. These people, to me, are crazy. I have lived elsewhere in the United States of America. There are good and decent people who would never allow me to go through what I went through here anywhere else I have lived. But in Minnesota, it's another story. It's the total opposite. Not one person will do anything, even their job that they're paid to do, to prevent what's destroying my life in the state of Minnesota. It's a complete 180 from everything I've experienced in every other state I've visited or lived in. And you're going to hear that in this audio. So let's jump into the audio of this officer's visit, but I do have to explain something first. The first 2.5 minutes of this is a lot of silence, and the reason is because I'm fumbling around trying to call up audio samples of the noise. Now here's what happened. Up until that time, I thought people were going to do their jobs. I thought my landlord would, or the city council, or the police would do their jobs. I thought the neighbors would be reasonable. I had made a lot of recordings, but I had not organized them. I had not, logged them. Stereo recordings weren't matched together. I mean, it was just a bunch of chaotic audio that I hadn't compiled into something useful beyond that little bit that I took for the city council. So it's that audio that I put on a chip on my netbook, and I carried that into the living room with an amplifier so I could play it for the police officer, because all my recordings were in my bedroom on my desktop computer. By that point, my bedroom was the only place I could live in that apartment. I couldn't even live in the rest of the apartment. So what you're going to hear at the beginning is me calling up the audio. The thing is, the only audio I had that took a whole bunch of noise samples and put them together into one place was from a podcast that a podcaster I'd done a lot of mashups and work for played this audio and commented on it. And at the very end, he said, this is shocking. And he said, why don't you call your landlord or the police? But that's the only place I had the audio in one place. So I started playing that audio, and you'll hear the police officer cut me off and not allow me to play it. And he's going to say, I don't care to hear what other people have to say, etc., etc. But I don't care were really the first words out of his mouth in this visit, other than what's going on at the beginning. And that set the tone for his performance throughout his entire visit. I don't care. Anyway, I wanted to point out that at the beginning of this, that's why you hear 2.5 minutes of basically silence as I'm struggling to try to find some kind of audio that this guy will actually listen to on this little netbook, when all the audio I have is on another computer in another room, and it's not even organized in any way that I can find it quickly. And there's one other thing I want to mention here. One of the other reasons I have hesitated to post this audio online is because of what I sound like. And it's not because I'm out of control or anything. I'm very calm. The problem is I'm inside my own home. I'm an adult. I'm a professional. I'm going to work every day, working hard in an industry that saves lives. I'm a pretty good guy. But when you listen to me speak, I sound like a guy who is completely hopeless and helpless and defenseless. I'm sitting there almost begging this guy to help me. And that's very embarrassing for me to post audio of me speaking that way. That's not the way I operate in a world of competent people. But there are no competent people in Minnesota. That's what they had reduced me to at that time. And that was 2 years ago when I still had a job and a home. So as embarrassing as it is for you to hear me just fumbling for words for a guy who obviously, I'm looking at the guy, he didn't care. And I'm trying to fumble for words that's going to make a guy who just doesn't care. And if you know of a better way to get someone who doesn't give a damn to give a damn, send me an email, because I'd sure like to know how to make that happen here in Minnesota. Okay, so I'm going to begin the audio of the police visit now. Notice that the first thing out of my mouth is to talk about my city council visit. The reason I mentioned that was to conjure up in his mind whatever his bosses had told him about this situation. Based on my conversation with them, I assumed that they would have informed any officer who visited me about the situation. Apparently that wasn't the case. Also, in the first minute or so, listen very carefully to Muffy stomping upstairs, because later this officer is going to say, I don't hear a thing.
So what's going on?
I went to the city council on Tuesday to talk about the noise these people make for the last 6 months.
Okay.
They've relegated me to living in that room. This is storage. I'm 46 years old. I shouldn't live this way. I'm not talking about squeaks, that's the intro. I'm talking about violent felony. Would you like to hear a sample? I can't guarantee they'll do it. They might do it as we speak, but they've been doing it. The night before last, I didn't even sleep all night. They've taken away half my Thanksgiving vacation so far. Where is it? This one might be better. This is, I used to I used to do work for this show. And I've had to stop because it's audio production. I haven't done anything, so I've, lost my rep. I was starting my own show. That's all gone. They have really destroyed everything I'm doing with my life. But this is the show I used to do stuff for, and he's commenting on it.
From St. Paul, he has created a lot of mashups in the past, and this all stems from the fact he's got some really rude neighbors.
10-12.
He's got some upstairs neighbors that have.
I don't care to hear about what other people are saying about you or the neighbors or anything like that.
Sample I have.
Okay.
He's had to rearrange his whole life.
I thought you meant actual sounds that were coming from upstairs.
I can do it. It's
just an audio example here
that's what,
of what.
I was going to try to show you. There you go, right out of the gate from the horse's mouth, he sets the tone for this entire visit. Notice a couple of things. First words out of his mouth, I don't care to hear blah 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 blah. Second of all, he says, I thought you were talking about examples of the noise from upstairs. 1 second later, the audio that I'm playing, the podcaster says, here are some examples. This guy would never give anything enough time to pan out to produce evidence. The reason is because he wanted to maintain total control over the situation. I knew what was going on. I knew what was coming next in that audio sample. He did not. He knew absolutely nothing. But rather than giving me the benefit of the doubt, rather than letting me make my case for him, he had to interrupt and stop what I was trying to present him so that he maintained total control. That is what was most important to him, not gathering information, but maintaining control over the situation. Also, while you listen to this audio, notice that Muffy is upstairs the whole time, banging around. This is not by any stretch of the imagination the worst that she subjects me to by a long shot. But what you're hearing is the ambient noise that I'm subjected to inside my own home all the bloody time. And this guy seems to think that that is perfectly acceptable ambient noise inside my home. Alright, here's, if we can dig out, let's see on this little machine.
After listening to the audio, it's pretty shocking. Take a listen to it.
Alright, so this is in real time, so it takes a lot longer to find it. This was at 1:30 in the morning.
When was that?
1:30 in the morning.
This morning?
2 mornings ago. And it went on. It wasn't entirely on. Most people are pretty on too. They left at like 2 in the morning. But jeez, I knew this would happen. It's hard to. That's what I was trying to tell the council. It's really hard to just take what happens in real time and present it to you. Okay, I need to comment a bit on this silence again, or mumbling from me. From the moment this guy took control of the situation that he knew nothing about very early in his visit, I was flustered. He had shot down the best audio that I had because it had someone else's voice at the beginning of it. He didn't get to the part where it had the real evidence, the best audio. So I had to look for something else. But you know what? I didn't know what was on that chip. Between the time I called the police and he arrived, I threw whatever I could on that chip. I didn't know where any of the audio was. And as I played back that one from 1:30 in the morning, 2 nights earlier, as I played back that sample, I was realizing just how horrible the audio card, the sound card is in that little tiny netbook of mine. I'm trying to play it back through this amplifier, and I'm trying to get the level that would create the same sense of vibration in the room that I experienced in the real world when they made this noise in the first place. So I'm trying to juggle all of these factors, and I'm trying to do it now feeling like I'm on his leash. Instead of us standing as equals and me presenting something to him, now I'm trying to respond to his demands or his commands because he shot down the best evidence I had. He didn't let me play it.
So within the last 10 minutes or so, 15 minutes, that's when you heard the loud banging again? Okay.
What it is they're I've talked to them before. I talked to them once after a month when they moved in. I told them I have a professional job. I need sleep. I understand it's an old place, but violent things that shake my floor. That light bulb kept going out when they moved in. I just stopped using it. My refrigerator's gone out. I mean, the violence shakes everything. And then I posted that little notice. I think it's as respectful as I can be. Along with the chart showing and they just have shown no interest at all in that. Okay, if you listened carefully to that last segment, you will find an important transition there. I transitioned from trying to present physical evidence, which he didn't want to hear the best evidence I had. I transitioned to making arguments instead. Now, if I was in a court of law, I would want to focus on that physical evidence. He forced me to go down to stage 2 to present argumentation, and that included things like I already spoke to these neighbors and asked them nicely to stop, and they didn't stop, which of course implies that it's either deliberate or negligent. I also showed him loudness graphs so that he could visually see the noise, and I mentioned that the vibration was so severe that it blew out my light bulbs in the kitchen and, well, probably anyway, blew out my refrigerator. But the point is, at this early moment in his visit, I'm already defensive because his initial desire to take control took the power away from me to present what I needed to present to him. Now I was only reacting to this guy, and it wasn't going to go well from that point forward.